Hello, thank you very much for joining me today. This is by way of a World Autism Awareness Week event that I thought I'd put on because I've never done one before, in which I put over a few ideas, go on about myself, and you can always read a transcript. Yes, I am saying neurodivergency and not neurodiversity, which I will explain as I go on. I also want to pose the question, are everyone that publicly identify as autistic relate to others on that basis and have autism views that they communicate all the neurodiversity movement, including the people who say they're against the neurodiversity movement? Well, I think they are. Sadly, I won't be discussing how I identified a convicted paedophile rapist on Twitter back in 2019 and pursued the man to reveal his true identity. It's so exciting. I'll do that another time, but I will touch on the people he's so very, very friendly with. Okay, my name is Paul Wady. That is not a pseudonym. My initials are actually P.S. Wady. I know, my mother was H.M. Wady. I love it. I'm a diagnosed autistic adult who lives in London with his equally formally diagnosed autistic wife and a cat who's over there, who hopefully will come on the car, interrupt me in a minute. So some would say that's three of us on the metaphorical spectrum. I work for a major autism charity and have published a book called Gorilla Aspies, a neurotypical society infiltration manual. Teaches you how to bully, seduce, manipulate and coerce. In other words, be neurotypical. Hang on. I'm going to turn the sound... Oh, no, I'll keep the sound on. You guys interrupt. Go on, interrupt. As well as having the longest running... When I mean interrupt, I mean interject. I do apologise, but the connotations of the term interrupt. Anyway, I've published this book as well as having the longest running solo show about being autistic in the world so far. Kian Binchy got close. He did a few years of his show, The Misfit Analyst, and hopefully Kian will keep it up. Much respect, Kian. I started an entirely autistic theatre company called Stealth Aspies as well, which toured and, together with my solo show, played the Edinburgh Festival and various places like Southend-on-Sea. I did my show in Manhattan, funnily enough, in a bar, a venue, and also I did it in Dublin. Very proud of, for As I Am charity. Hello there, Adam. I also produce badges and t-shirts with messages like neurotypicals are weird and cure neurotypicals now, all on my website, which is called paulwady.com. Quelle surprise. I would also like to add that everything I created without any kind of template. I mean, so to this day, I'm working in the dogs how to perform my material, and any feedback is much appreciated. I have written this piece in order to put over my perspective to promote debate. If anyone fancies it, you can join in by video or you can just comment. I can't see the comments section. I just see your... Have a look at these oh, you gorgeous people. Hello, you hunky beasts, you beautiful people. Right, so now to explain the title of this talk. Neurodivergency, as I understand the term, ended up triumphing neurodiversity as the most precise term for me to use to describe all of us who identify as being what we collectively are, which is also archaically known as autistic, umbrella term, but I use it all the time. You will usually, though, just find me calling us all autistic. I use the term in a broad umbrella sense. Some people go mad when they hear that, as they can only see it as one more condition the neurodiverse have. See? So I use the term what I like to think of as a street way, the way most people who have nothing to do with the world of autism think of it, which drives autistics mad because they have to be really, well, you can guess. Yeah. The idea is that we are neurodivergent from the neurotypical, which is neurodiverse, let's face it. Whilst acknowledging that humanity as a whole is neurodiverse, we diverge from the way that people ordinarily work. And I've got to keep to my script. Now, I joined the scene in 2004 when I was 41 years of age, after a sudden and rather dramatic diagnosis, which you can read about online in the Guardian Weekend magazine, October 2004. I discovered that I was autistic at the age of 41. I had to be literally hauled through the courts and acquitted of any wrongdoing in order to get it, by the way. Common assault, very embarrassing. Drama is a bit of a theme in my life, having a background in acting, but I never talk about my acting days, even though now I'm in Equity Union, the Actors Union, darling. Not that I'm a lobby or anything, where I am not the only autistic person. you should know. So my whole involvement in the world of autism started with a baptism of fire. I got to live the life of action and adventure I always fancied as a schoolboy. I was 41. In later life, when you're supposed to have grown out of it all, a simple scan of the social groups around the term autism, such as parents, professionals in the field, be they medical or academic, and of course people like myself, revealed what I'd gotten into. I was like, blimey, okay, where's the people like me? Well, there were many people like me, and I've been trying to find them ever since. There appeared to be arguments going on even in those days, rather a lot of them between the parents of very disabled children and people like myself who are capable of independent lives, and substantial moaning about how hard their lives were. Temple Grandin was going around writing books and talking about being autistic. I thought it was a joke that I was autistic. Then I got diagnosed. Then I walked into a social group in London and thought, these people are like me. And that was after I was acquitted. February 2005, my future wife walked in, did exactly the same thing and didn't get out the way of me in time. Married her in 2 years, fast as I could before she got to know me. Suddenly I had the answer to a question I had never known how to ask. I did not suffer from depression. I was in good health and had spent my life accepting that I was not normal but could work, relate to myself to others and get on with others. Was I very successful and really clever? No, no, not at all. I was in relatively low-paid jobs. But I was always smart, and I really educated myself with a lot of A-levels that I didn't take. So, I'm a complete paradox. I don't know if I'm intelligent or I'm not. I don't really add up in terms of intelligence. I shouldn't really touch on the subject, but there's a lot of academia, a lot of people with big qualifications in the world of autism, and somehow or another I managed to relate to them. Don't ask me, okay? I just tried on my good looks at my age. Suddenly, I had the answer to a question I never knew how to ask. Oh yeah, I said that bit. I did not suffer from I could relate to normal people, providing they too had absolute self-integrity and no loyalty to gangs and groups. They were my style of people. So, I waffled on a bit about academia, and we can just forget that. In my early life, I made an effort to broaden my understandings. I'd always had this thing about developing the ability to be creative around concepts. I love that. Innovating new perspectives. So upon diagnosis, I decided to do two things, folks. Make sense of it all and promote other autistics, because I'm a Buddhist. Am I recording? Am I recording? I'm recording. Oh, good. I'll leave that recording. Oh, good. That's what you do. I didn't need self-aggrandizement or some sort of famous success. I was just trying to help people and develop unconditional loving kindness. Now, I'd like to add that no one ever bothers to talk to me about academic life. I've just gone into that. Oh, bugger that. Oh, I'm not too bright. But I can still dance a bit of a jig. I once spent 3.5 hours in the philosophy department of Oxford University as part of a 5-person debate on the subject of autism morality I was invited to in about 2018. Hello, Professor Ken, remember that? I got on fine though because everyone was so straightforward and clearly defined in what was going on. I have yet to discover this world of profound thinkers whose rationality is so rarefied that anyone who does not have it cannot keep up with them. If all of us, okay, just work harder and take longer to understand the terms, crack the concepts, and how they all work together as a sequence, as a structure, you can understand anything. Okay, the idea of not being not that bright just isn't true. All you got to do is sit down, understand the terms, understand how everything connects, animate the structure, the algorithm, how these ideas work, and you can get your head around anything. Which just goes to show how little is really involved in making sense, as opposed to the complications and emotional ravings that some of us think they can justify as a dialogue. Social media, Twitter, which is a major point I want to make. I find the world of autism, even amongst all the books in the National Autistic Society's comprehensive library, which is the biggest one in Western Europe, which I got unlimited access to for many years, biased on a number of perspectives, which is one reason why I wrote my Gorilla Aspies book. I mean, I was told by a head of information department that books on autism were either deep scholastic works, or testimonies of parents, or perhaps even the tragically afflicted themselves and their terrible struggles to be neurotypical. And I thought, there's something wrong here. There's nothing positive and rock and roll and earthy. So don't worry, you get my book. There's loads on it about sex, getting it, having it, relating to people. Don't worry, all the good stuff. A good recent example of intellectual snobbery and rigid agenda in autism was a YouTube film that the infamous Jill Heil Parents Escher staged. Does anyone understand that term? Heil Parents movement. You will if you look at her Twitter and what she's doing. Jill Escher staged in order to completely ridicule facilitated communication. Do you know what that is? It's where you've got the autistic person here and you're there and you relate to them and you speak for them and you communicate with them and they communicate through you. Right. Escher loves getting academics together under the banner of a so-called organisation. It makes her look big and clever because she loves academics. Think about it. She managed to get together a bunch of university lecturers to rip the concept to pieces. I mean, I don't trust it. I don't trust facilitated communication at all. Just put that on the table. At one point, one of them said, only a PhD can understand the ideas of another PhD, which means that no one with a doctorate can be a teacher to undergrads, I assume. You don't get any PhDs in schools. Right. Jill has a website called the National Council for Cerebral Autism and a gang of like-minded fascist parents and academics who act as if they have never heard the term Kanner syndrome. When I started in 2004, it was this outdated term used to denote severe autism, which is what Escher is obsessed with because she's got two severely autistic kids, loves them, set up this whole organisation. It's just completely obsessed around severely disabled autistic people. Children are the only people anyone should ever worry about, and all the rest of us should just look after ourselves. It is the term they seem to be trying to invent, Kanner syndrome. They don't seem to know it, Anyway, one day all dimensions of neurodiversity and autism will only be the one that Jill and her friends approve of, and all others will surely be made illegal, which seems to be the attitude I was encountering on social media and in these talks. And that's the point, that I was clearly seeing very aggressive behaviour around something that's supposed to be nothing more than what, a mental health issue? Where do all these politics come from? It's just a simple thing. It's not a bloody simple thing at all. And we as a kind are not that simple either. And that's one of the points I wanted to put over. They also use some very crude terms to deride facilitated communication. When you hear people who are supposed to know better than you saying something is crazy or wacko, well, exactly. There's this kind of arrogant authority in what they were saying. Such academic people earn their living explaining their ideas to others. Besides which, if you cannot be understood by anyone but an elite, you're living in a kind of bubble world of your own. This is the world of autism. It's not quantum physics. You're supposed to be able to relate to people. It's relating to people human right in front of you. Many disabled autistic people are pretty mundane in their needs and their communication and their reality, if you see what I'm getting at. So if you consider we're talking about severely disabled children, will some deeply complex ideas save these kids from a lifetime of support? Beware, these things may be for intellectual snobs to kid themselves they have power and control. Don't complicate the ordinary if you don't have to. You may lose the straightforward basic truth of the situation of autism. So there's a little warning, folks. Beware these complicated stories. Now, this is a bit of a cliche of how I personally do my training around the country, which I'll explain about in a minute. I keep it very pragmatic, I keep it simple, I keep it down to the level of one person facing another and handling that. I get told off by some autistics for not going into more detail, but when you face people who are just ordinary folks trying to do jobs and work with the general public, I think it's better to cut to the most salient facts rather than explain the entire workings of the equipment as well, if you see what I mean. Just tell them how to use the telly, not how the damn thing works in every stage, which led me to see that autistics go into huge amounts of detail over explanations when they don't have to. It's our nature, isn't it? We're really hyper-focused. Well, we're our own worst enemies in advocacy when we do that. You need relatively simple fellas like me keeping it on a certain level. Sorry, guys, but you're just going, no, you're not getting to the point. I've got to really make sense of it. Anyway, that's that point made. Now I return to my life story. Hey, me. Back in 2006, I went to work for a major autism charity. Of course, it's the National Autistic Society. It's just that I'm not a representative of the NAS. I'm not speaking on behalf of the NAS, so it's just me speaking about myself. Anyway, I then met an awful lot of autistics and got involved in a lot of stuff around working with autistics and working in centres where there were relatively disabled, non-verbal autistics, meaning a lot of people who work with autistic people. Turned out I had known a few of autistics before I got diagnosed in my life, even had relationships with one or two autistics. But we didn't know. I mean, you've got a girlfriend, she's got a boyfriend, you've got a couple, and they don't know they're autistic. That happened, an American. My ideas about autism mainly come from knowing people and being around them, rather than the alienated and filtered world online we now have and take a bit too much for granted. Wags finger. Too much for granted. It's not facing people one-to-one. Yeah. I think this is an important point to explain about how I see everything. It's all very well writing stuff online, but what I want to know is, what is the reality for people offline? Because that is the reality, and all else is this virtuality we've created, and you can project on it and play games with it and have arguments with people in 280 characters. I was to find out that in the world of autism, a great deal of dialogues will mostly be around biases and how people felt, because there just wasn't that much to talk about anyway. Really, we're still inventing the whole cultural ethos around being autistic people in community, I think. And little gatherings like this are important. And this is another thing I want to put over, that we are still inventing it. And we have schisms in our community, different opinions. Chiefly, the obsession with labeling neurodiversity from the overall let me start that again. Chiefly the obsession of labeling neurodivergency from the overall neurodiversity of the neurotypical majority a disorder. Okay? Chiefly the obsession of blah, 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 a disorder, labeling autism a disorder. That's what I said. I'm sorry that was a bit complicated. There seems to be this absolute war over the term disorder and disability, okay? There's people can only label autism a disorder. Why? Why can't you have different... Look, if you don't have the properties of a disorder, you don't have a disorder. If you don't have the properties of a disability, then your condition is not disabling. I think it varies from individual to individual. You need to call it autism spectrum condition, because it varies. Some people are disordered being autistic. Sure, it's visible. Some people can get enough together on top of their own natures and make them work for them that they're not. And some people, I think most of us, are in between. We are and we aren't in different ways. You should say, I have a disability in ADHD respect, but not in an OCD respect. I have a disability in a sensory respect, but not in a dyspraxia or dyslexia respect. You say, autistic profile of our natures is what I fight for. Whereas, as I'm going to mention later, in America, you have to call it a disorder and disability in order to get the support that many of us need. They've got no choice. You've got to play this game. Okay, so why all this sound of fury? Why all these arguments? So why not just have the opinion and still support the positive community and identify concepts around neurodiversity? Why are people fighting? Well, let's look at the concept of neurodiversity. Judy Singer, fine lady from Australia, when she coined the concept of neurodiversity in her sociology degree thesis back in 1998, there was such a time, she assumed that this would lead to greater understanding and acceptance of the eccentric, the geek, the solitary and antisocial intellectual, the outsider, and even the self-medicating, depressed, self-hating addict with zero awareness of their autistic nature. The idea was to make sense, to bring understanding and awareness, to sort things out. What seemed to have happened since then is, to my mind, an overcomplication. Sounds like autistic behavior. Here is a quote from the first page of her book, Neurodiversity, and I shall read that rather than share it on the screen. For me, she said, the key significance of the autism spectrum lies in its call for and anticipation of a politics of neurological diversity or neurodiversity, the neurological different, represent a new addition to the familiar political categories of class, gender, race, and will add to the insights of the social model of disability. So I hope I read that well. The rise of neurodiversity takes postmodern fragmentation one step further. Just as the postmodern era sees every once too solid belief melt into air, even our most taken for granted assumptions that we all more or less see, feel, touch, hear, smell, and sort information in more or less the same way, unless visibly disabled, are being dissolved. So what she's saying is, the world's a lot bigger than we know about. We know sexuality's on a spectrum. That's only the birds and the bees. Same thing with gender and the brain. Different looks, different bodies, different brains. It is so simple. I was messing with the volume there. So that was 1998, and the book she signed for me was 2017. So now the world is a better place and the concept of us all existing on a neurological spectrum is commonplace? No. Everyone knows you get severely disabled autistic people who can never live independent lives and will always need the love and support of their families. We all know there are parents out there practically martyring themselves over their high-need children, some of whom need containment all the time. People who cannot be trusted with freedoms most people take for granted. Yes, we all know that. But does the world understand that there's this big spectrum? Everyone also knows that you get lots of different communities too, like the stealth Aspies, as I christened them, isn't me teacher. People who could look, sound and act as if they were not autistic, people who suffer comorbidities, depression and become addicts, all smoke screens hiding their primary alienation from the world and themselves because they don't understand their own autistic natures. So you get stealth Aspies who, like myself, who don't have any of those things. You can get stealth Aspies hiding behind an identity or a character, and then you get stealth Aspies who are drink, drugs, depression, comorbidities. But we just don't qualify. I mean, when I went to see a consultant psychiatrist in Boss Hospital in 2001, I blagged my way in there, courtesy of my GP. He said there was absolutely nothing wrong with me, and I got it in writing. I mean, literally nothing. I mean, this is at the height of my meditating when I was very good at sitting in waiting rooms for half an hour. It's clever. They kept you waiting in a waiting room for half an hour and then said, "How are you?" Of course, I like doing that. I like just sitting there and none to do. I've done so much meditation, you see. I was far too stable. And the moral of the story is that if you can avoid negativity and you can maintain positive, continuous experience of life, then psychiatry is out of a job. They only really get you when something goes wrong. There's got to be negativity. There's got to be crisis, you see. And if you're one of these people who always muddles through life like me and always seems to heal whatever it throws at you, then you never get a bloody formal diagnosis in Bath Psychiatric Unit with consultant psychiatrists. It was only a few years later, 2004, I got a proper diagnosis, you see. Because even the diagnosis criteria is flawed. As there's any women out there, do I need to tell you what it's like for you guys? Well, it's like that for all of us, really. People generally get diagnosed autistic and get to crisis point. Something goes wrong. Or, like my wife, they read it and you scientists think, oh, I'll get a diagnosis. And ended up with a husband. Be careful what you read. Everyone knows there are communities of people who live independent lives but need support. Other communities of people who will need the support and family of professionals that can still do jobs and relationships, yet more communities of autistics who can never manage jobs, relationships of most sort, let alone romantic, and will always live at home, but can be highly educated people. Another community of parents communities with and without being, and with autistic, and with or without mental health issues. So you get parents who are not autistic, who have autistic kids, parents who aren't autistic, with or without mental illness, due to their kids literally driving them mad. And that's an issue, and I don't think that's looked into enough, and I think those people need more understanding. So lots of different communities in the metaphorical autistic spectrum apparently are vying for attention. Why vying for attention? What is this attention thing? Well, the answer is they all want the world to understand them, to support them, to get benefits, to get mental health support, to get the world to see what they're going through when they're having a nervous breakdown. They've got 3 kids and a high-pressure job to handle, or they're just someone like myself. It could be a single person trying to get by in life, trying to find a relationship or a job, or just somebody trying to relate to a world that won't relate to them outside of cosplay conferences and Doctor Who conventions. All right, and Trekkies. Happy now. So lots of different communities in the metaphorical autistic spectrum, because you have to use some sort of terms to describe what's going on. Where am I? There I am. Because you have to use the terms what's going on. Some of us prefer the spectrum, others the autistic spectrum of disorders, some of us the autistic spectrum, autistics, Aspies, neurodivergent, neurodiverse, geeks, eccentrics. It's a rather long list for one thing, isn't it? Why? I'll tell you why, because we can't seem to settle down, calm down and actually focus, because there's so many different communities, different politics, all fighting for ownership of more or less the same concept. Some of us I have seen stand there in camera declare, I have autistic spectrum disorder. Well, there they stand, as far as I'm concerned, defining themselves as less. Disorder, disability, they all have the same connotations. You are inferior to those who do not have such conditions. You are not well. You are ill, diseased, malfunctional, less than normal. I mean, many of us want to see ourselves as that, as such. They really do. I read tremendous enthusiasm amongst a lot of autistics who just want to look in the mirror every day and say, I am wrong in the head. I need understanding and support for my issues. Well, that's a choice. I respect that. But I am not in some sort of weird fight over meanings of the term autism to just denote one suffers from one's autistic nature. I don't know why others are, because you can be in the right conditions in a private space in your home, say, and not be suffering at all in what you're doing. And you go out the door and you're suffering. Then you go to a different place and the conditions are right and you're not suffering anymore. It's like if you're in a wheelchair, you are disabled when you want to use your legs, or you want to do any one of a number of things that having lower body mobility facilitates you. It's as simple as that. Disability is relative. I don't believe in all these absolutes. Now, as a Buddhist, I have a real issue with being negative around myself because I seek to live in the real world whilst developing a loving kindness for myself and everyone. I just cannot accept that defining yourself as less when you don't actually have to be that brutal on yourself is necessary. So why do it? Well, I think a lot of people think that's the correct medical way to define your autistic nature. It's as simple as that. Also, there is this big movement now to be positive about being disabled. So you have a disability, but that's okay. Negative is positive. I have a definable physical or mental deficit, but I have plenty of positive traits, and or it does not matter to my overall picture that I have deficits. So they somehow balance it out that it's cool, which is fine by me as long as you get a positive experience of yourself that is realistic, you see, and that's the tricky thing. In America, it has been explained to me that if you do not have a disability stage, you know, the kind of support and understanding that people need there, so they play the game, wink, wink, you then get intelligent, rational, and eloquent people making out they are mentally disabled, which is another thing that myself and quite a few people find a bit paradoxical. I think that many people I experience want to be taken seriously and know what they are talking about, and the best way is to subscribe to this formal and long-standing frame of reference and attitude. A lot of the anti-neurodiversity autistics seem to me to be intellectual snobs who have spent a bit too much time in academia. The classic over-intellectually developed whilst not so much in terms of empathy for themselves and others. You get that? An aggressive drive to be right in life, often unemployed and outside of romantic relationships. Hopefully, one day none of them will be. Alone, aloof, best they don't want to be. Seemingly obsessive about their shared perspective that only the old neurotypical way of seeing things is right, and all else absurd. Here is an example of a gender in autism. Now, there's a nice man. See if I can switch over to this fella, actually. There's a function that allows me to do that. Let's share the screen. Share the screen. Here he is. I don't know if you can see the good doctor. Professor Thomas E. Brown is here on the screen. Sweet guy. And you see he's saying they can do where they have no trouble paying attention and no trouble focusing. So that's the good doctor. Now, he gave a talk for just about the nature of ADHD. And this is what I came from his first few minutes of the talk. There is a constant attitude around being smart and intelligent. It's almost fascist in the way he takes for granted that being smart is normal and everything else is mental illness and wrong. Being able to concentrate on anything you want for as long as you desire seems to be his idea of a normal, healthy brain. In fact, most people without ADHD are doing the best they can to do that. I'm going to switch my speaker off for a minute. Okay, so I can't hear everyone else. Then we are told that ADHD people can concentrate on a few things absolutely, okay, with no realizations, because if they don't really love something, they are not really interested. So what he's saying is that ADHD people's concentration comes and goes. Mine does that. It's kind of like a radio dial slipping. And he says that they can concentrate, ADHD people can concentrate on a few things totally, no problem at all. And he doesn't seem to have any realization that it's because if they don't really love something, they're not really into it. They're not really interested, you see? And he doesn't talk about absolute self-integrity, a lack of capacity to be unfaithful to your real passions. And that's what I think's going on. He never thinks of this. And then I write, but overall at the start, he talks as if being smart and able to do certain things is the only standard for being mentally healthy. Attention problems suggest that his whole attitude is around being able to do things, get things right, work in jobs and pass tests and courses, apart from behavioural problems, which he discounts in favour of concentration in order to achieve intellectually. He's not really saying anything else to me in his talk. Beware of his frame of reference. Don't take it for granted. He's a nice man, and his descriptions of ADHD definitely work for me, but he does not realise what he has bought into, and takes for granted. So it's a disorder until you find the things you work on you love, at which point you have no concentration problems and the disorder bit vanishes. How does that work? So that for me is an example of intellectual snobbery and latent agendas, and that was a whole section of my talk about that. So I'd like to go back to last section. So we go back to the original theme. As I reflected before, the idea is that we are the neurodivergent for the neurotypical, whilst acknowledging that humanity as a whole is neurodiverse. See? That we can lay claim to being a separate neurotribe with its own group identity and shared characteristic. There you are, there's the book title. Which makes the point that the wonderful world of autism is just packed full of pedantic brainy types, non-stop arguing about precise terms and what they mean and what they should mean, because we're all bloody autistics, but also because the whole field is still new in history. Which brings me to people who really excited me when I found them, the people who fight non-stop to argue against any kind of positivity around being autistic, the anti-neurodiversity neurodivergence, whom I think constitute members of our own neurodiversity movement. Anyway, these were people with exactly the same properties as the neurodiversity movement, except they seem to behave and relate like wannabe neurotypical intellectuals. Simple as that. They got into social groups, related to each other on the basis of their shared beliefs and of being autistic, and worked together online in dialogues when arguing with others. Just the same as the neurodiversity mob they talked about and said they rejected. Same thing. They formed alliances with anti-vaxxers and dodgy charities that sought to cure autism. Bit of a warning bell there. And of course, a world of academics that cannot accept the term autism can never be used in any context other than disability, and the one in their books. They appeared to do everything but meet up in person, whereas people with my views tend to do that. They were often visibly depressed and unhappy people. They were very aggressive. One autistic woman I know was friendly with them for a while and said they were all very nice to her, but they were super angry all the time. She couldn't understand why. Invariably with a background in academia, by the way, usually not in romantic relationships, but many people aren't. I mean, neither was I for a long time. My poor wife. Also, what kept appearing to be the case was that few of them were in employment, so they had the time and energy to use mainly, if not entirely, on Twitter to communicate. Twitter? Why would you choose a medium like that that's limited to 280 characters? I don't know. Strange things went on. I mean, I never actually argued with such people who are christened the autistic dark web by one prominent member who recently deleted his Twitter account after all these years. I tried to take them on board to see if I could agree with them. I wanted to see if my ideas were wrong rather than right. They use so many nasty and childish tactics to nullify and block such debate that I was unable to use that process. You couldn't have a dialogue with them. They were too busy talking at you and ignoring anything you said. They just wanted to fight people and talk amongst themselves, presumably on the basis that if you thought autism was anything other than a mental disorder like schizophrenia, you were too stupid to reason with. And obviously, narcissistic, I mean, with a face like mine. Who could blame me? They constantly acknowledged that they were autistic. They related to each other on the basis of being autistic, whilst maintaining they were just ordinary people with a mental illness they wanted to get rid of. Not that it was the foundation of their minds, personalities, and how they thought and felt. It was the whole, and how They were nothing more than the same thing as the people they thought they opposed, but with an intensely negative attitude towards the condition of the mind they defined by the term autism. It was all really silly, and I thought it was hilarious. Such anti-neurodiversity movement autistics showed the world that despised and rejected neurodiversity, that autistic adults could be taken seriously by them, that we as a kind are as diverse in our self-definements and politics as the non-autistic world, that a political community of adults existed around what was supposed to be a mental health condition. I mean, what kind of psychiatric disorder generates such passionate and aggressive arguments than those who say they have it? Are we all neurodiversity movement? Yeah, I think we are. Recently in the Times, Vice Admiral Nick Hine of the British Navy printed, "To be blunt, autism has made me a better naval officer." The second Sea Lord spoke of his condition for the first time, telling Larissa Brown the forces need more neurodiversity. And let's have a look at the old... Let's put him on here, shall we? Yeah. There he goes. Hello, sailor. Yes. Fine fella. Typical autistic. Wonderful. Look at all the medals he's on. You can have all these medals when you're on the spectrum. They say his condition meant he was suited to the loneliness of commanding a nuclear sub. My God, he's the fella you want rolling. For years, colleagues teased Vice Admiral Nick Hine for being blunt, challenging and difficult. He just used to send them up the torpedo tubes and that was the end of them. Now Hine, one of the Royal Navy's most senior officers, has revealed that he was diagnosed with autism a decade ago and is urging others like him to join the military. The second Sea Lord, 55, so he's only 2 years younger than me, I know, revealed his condition as he warned that Britain would not be able to win future wars unless it was able to think differently. We'll all get nuked unless we're autistic. In an interview with The Times, the former commander of a nuclear submarine said he was speaking out about his autism for the first time because he wanted to leave the Navy in a better place. Hine, a father of one, said, "I have a brain that is wired differently. It doesn't mean that I'm disabled. It doesn't mean that I'm odd. It doesn't mean that I'm in any way, shape or form less capable. It means I am different." Good old Admiral. Fantastic. And then down here we've got some representations. We've got the Spectrum Girls Survival Guide, a very good book, but written and published by Sienna Castellon, whom I met at the, was it 2019? When was it? December 2018 or December 2019? We did what's the phrase? Protest against the All in a Row play, and Sienna was there. And also the Autism Friendly Guide to Periods. Again, these are tropes, these are memes, never existed, things were brought into existence, first time in human history. An Autism Friendly Guide to Periods. Robin Stewart's book, together with the magnificent The Independent Woman's Handbook for Super Safe Living on the Autistic Spectrum. Where were these books before? In 1980, a collective of women in New York published Our Bodies, Ourselves, which is a 2-inch thick book all about women's health, bits and things about your body and your health. And they said, well, we had to write this because we couldn't find anything else like it. That is how big and how bad history has been. And that's what's happening in the last part of the 20th century, the beginning of the 21st. And you and I and all of us are part of that movement. And it's just very exciting, I think. The problem with disability is you have to have the conditions or symptoms of a disability to be disabled. So many of us use social media and talk about how hard our lives is. We can articulate, relate, use social media and dialogue with others about having a mental disorder and disability. Now I want to say something heretical here. Exactly how much of our disabilities and disorders are relative to an egotistic concept of what we want to be, what we want to be able to do every day as opposed to our own limits. How much of our disabilities and disorders are relative to an egotistic concept of what we want to be, what we want to be able to do every day, as opposed to some things we can't do? At what point does a lack of ability, like anyone would have, become a disability and a disorder? No one ever discusses that. I can't juggle. Am I disabled because I can't juggle, or it's just not something I can do? Okay? If it impedes your life not being able to juggle, you've got problems. But supposing you have a life scenario where you don't have to juggle. Exactly. So you have an inability that is not a disability, but it's a disability in the right conditions. See, it's relative. That's what I'm trying to say. I don't believe in all these absolutes. What when we are definable as autistic people with neurodivergency at the root of our being, yet do not look, sound, act disabled? What are we then? How can you have a disability? Right. I believe the conventional frames of reference about being neurodivergent are too small and need to be expanded. A process that is taking place all the time anyway, due to there being so much written online. There seems to me to be a lot of agenda present in the language around autism. I can best describe this in terms of medical, academic, and even anti-vaccination and pro-curing lobbies. In America, the culture seems to project very heavily onto all things to do with not being neurotypical. The use of the term disorder in lectures and talks seems very aggressive and is telling about the attitude inherent to it. It sounds to me like it's reviled. You're a loser rather than a winner. You're an inferior rather than superior. You have inability rather than ability. Also, this constant "we are experts" attitude that I keep hearing over and over. It's very aggressive and limiting, as if the models will never and should never ever change about what they are talking about. Well, I think all our models, everything we relate to, should always be up for demolition. You cannot believe anything is an absolute, which is a Buddhist teaching, by the way. One autism professional I knew said they thought about autism as a personality type. That they use this as their model to understand and work with autistic people, that you're dealing with a personality type, characteristics. I think we see our autistic natures as such, and disorder and disability is relative and varying between people. We will have a more realistic picture of who and what we are. Now, I would like to end my talk there and throw it open to see if anyone has anything they would like to comment.